morning, good day, good afternoon, good night, and especially to Stuart, who joined us today from Melbourne, and it's now 11 p.m. and he's going to finish with us when it turns midnight. So on our questions at the end of the session, we will be rather quiet. So if you fell asleep, we won't bother you too much. So today we're having the second session on stories. The first one gave the fundamentals of storytelling, and having Madan there giving from his expertise all the tips and notes how to professionally manage the stories and use the stories for different usages, of course, in organizations and not only. Today, Stuart will be speaking on business storytelling, taking it a bit further. And next week, we will take a turn, take a curve, and John will be speaking about the plot, about story thinking, the concept of story thinking, and how it can be used for several different usages in the organization, and specifically for knowledge management. So after this spoiler, Stuart, you may start. We are all ears.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully that's coming up for you now. I'm so thankful to Madan for doing an amazing intro to stories and knowledge management last week. Hopefully most of you were here and you got to hear him talk, because he gave that grand vista of stories, and there's so much work that's been done in this area. So I'm lucky. I get the middle job of actually telling you how to write a story. So you're going to walk away tonight with a skill and with a tool that you can use to put these together. And then next week, as Moya just said, we're going to have John, who's then going to show you how you tactically use that to influence change. So you can see how the three of us fit together. And I'm excited to be sharing this with you today. We first came across this idea 3 years ago at Creative Melbourne, and some of my Russian friends were at that weekend, and it was an amazing event. And we were encouraged to take known practices, known tools, technologies, and combine them together to see if we could make better things. And this is one of the things that came out of that, of how to create a story. So I am from Australia, Melbourne, Australia. I'm a knowledge manager. I have a master's degree in KM. I'm currently the head of knowledge management for the Country Fire Authority. So we have 55,000 volunteer firefighters. Many of you may not know that we're the third largest fire state in the world. So south of Spain is the most dangerous, followed closely by California and then by us. And that's because we have quite a wet winter, so we have lots of growth here, but then we have dry summers, which then dry it out and create the fuel. And you need both those things. Some places are very lush, but they stay green all year, like Singapore. Some places are quite dry out in the desert of New South Wales and Queensland, so they don't get that much fuel. They dry out, but there's not that much greenery. So that's why it's so dangerous. That's why we have such a massive fire department here. And it's awesome to be a part of that. So I use business storytelling all the time because I've got to reach the people that I'm influencing, and they've often got lots of this on their shoulders. They're quite high ranking. They have a lot of authority, but a lot of responsibility resting on their shoulders. And so I need to break through that. And I use stories to capture their attention, but also to help them understand the change I'm trying to get them to make. And just last week, I had a fellow contact one of the directors of CFA, and he told me that he was asked, "Who are you dealing with at CFA?" And they said, "Stuart French." And apparently the director of CFA said, "Oh, you're talking to the right bloke. That guy has a vision to drag CFA kicking and screaming into the 2050s. So some of the stories are obviously getting through because they're starting to realize that I'm not just about putting in a piece of software or doing knowledge management better. I'm about changing the way we manage knowledge. So what does this mean? Well, firstly, they're incredible at improving engagement and retention and understanding. Second, they can be used to influence or convince people of something. And Moria mentioned 2 weeks ago, Dan and Chip Heath's book, Switch, which is an awesome book on this topic and gives you some real hints here. And it can also be used to transfer deep understanding of a technical topic. And Sean Callahan of Anecdote is wonderful when he talks about this subject. Now, just before I get into it, 2 things. When it comes to knowledge management, there's kind of 2 halves to knowledge management. There's the document management, the explicit management side, and there is the expertise and the wet knowledge management side. And just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm 90% wet knowledge management, 10% document knowledge management. So I'm about actually building capability in groups of people. And so that's where I'm coming from. Secondly, I'm from Australia, which means I've got a funny accent for most of you. And I also speak very quickly. So if you look at your reactions, you will see that under your reactions button, you've got a little party popper icon there. So if I'm talking too fast for you, I want you to set the little party popper icon off, all right? And I'll try and slow it down a bit so you understand what I'm saying. Okay, so if I say the word fish, that can mean lots of different things. So what is knowledge? Well, I mean, I could say fish and you could think of Nemo, you know, Finding Nemo and a fish. You could think of fishing, to fish, the verb. You might think of fish as a food. And if you're an Australian, then you might think of other types of fish that swim around in our water that maybe you don't want to swim with. Or if you've got a technical background, you may think of other sorts of fishing that start with PH instead of F and mean something completely different again. The point is that just words themselves don't convey total meaning. There's a real context. And the beauty of stories is they're amazing at transferring the context along with the content. And this is really important if you deal with really strong A-type directed leaders, because they just want to get to the point. And if you give them the content, they will run off with that content. They'll take the content, but they'll do it in their own context. They often won't pick up the context. And so stories are an awesome way, especially you can craft good short stories, of transferring that knowledge in one go before you lose their interest. So what is knowledge? Facts, information, skills acquired through experience and education. This is the dictionary definition of knowledge. I have a slightly different definition. I have a working definition of knowledge, and that is it's the capability of a person or a team to make sense of their surroundings and make high value decisions or actions. So it's not stuff that we hold in our meat purse. You know, it's not stuff we've remembered. Knowledge is our capability to act or decide well. And so when we think about transferring knowledge, what we're doing is we're actually constantly teaching those around us to make better decisions, if you think of it that way. And so simply remembering is not enough. And that's why just transferring flat, cold facts doesn't work. You can often, by the way, it does work. When they get those cold, hard facts, what they're very good at is doing tests to regurgitate the facts. What they're not good at is making better decisions with the facts. And that's where stories come in. So they're an amazing tool. And I first came across this. I was listening to a guy tell a story about a massive fire at a recycling plant in the north of Melbourne. This was nearly 20 years ago now. And he was talking about how they had these, and you can't see them in this picture, but there's along the left-hand side, there's a number of massive big water cannons. And those cannons are fed off a reticulated main. And the main had lost pressure. There was so many appliances. We had 30 fire trucks on site. We had these 4 major water cannons, and there just wasn't enough water pressure to drive all of these units. So we couldn't get the fire out. And so I was talking to him, and he mentioned that he had to dig through 3 inches of bitumen to find the valve head of what we call a shutoff valve. I was working for the water department at the time, and a shutoff valve separates 2 levels of water pressure. And so this is where the fire was. So they wanted to undo this shutoff valve so the water would feed into this zone, lifting the pressure, and would let the fire out. And so I said, John, how did you find the valve to, you know, when it was buried under the road surface? And he said, well, it's quite simple. Go get the map. So I went and got the map, and we laid it out. And he said, right, here's the street, and here's the side street, and here's the cutoff valve, right? And he said, there's a tree on the nature strip. So I got my metal detector and I went out 45 degrees from the tree, and I found it beeped, and I found it and dug through. Well, this is on auto for some reason. So I said, John, how did you know about the tree? And he said, that tree was a sapling when I put the valve in 35 years ago. And I said, John, that tree isn't in our database, is it? And he said, no, we did put it on the field cards. And so they used to draw these field cards, and they'd hand write the bits and pieces, and they'd even draw a little map, right? And there's the valve and there's the tree. Well, I said, how do we find it? And he said, well, we wrote it on those cards. You IT guys didn't put the information into your mapping system. And I realized at that point that we'd captured the information and we'd lost the knowledge. And so my whole KM journey started with a story. And part of the problem of transferring expertise, as Einstein said, was expertise just feels like common sense to those that possess it. So they don't think to share. But what they're very good at is telling stories. So one of the ways you can transfer expertise is to tell stories. And you've been in these rooms where you've got people just sharing facts after facts after facts. But our brains don't work like computers. We don't download information like a computer does, and we certainly don't remember it like a computer. And so we have to focus on the content and the information, and if we give them too much facts without the context, we leave them feeling lost and overwhelmed and inadequate and in the end disempowered. And that is the exact opposite of what we want. Remember, knowledge is to help us make better decisions. And if they're disempowered, it doesn't matter if they know all the facts. They won't be confident to make the decisions they need to make. Yeah. So don't get lost in that. Sometimes knowledge management is our own worst enemy because we create a disempowerment mindset of feeling like we never know enough, we never have all the facts, so we don't act. And it's actually in acting that we turn that information into knowledge and into wisdom. We work out what works. That's why Agile is so powerful in these environments. So how do you create a revelation for the listener? Because that's what you need to do. You need to kind of wake them up and give them a light bulb moment. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to tell a story in their context, not yours. You have to tell it in their language, using their terms and their phrases. You have to be really relatable. If they're in suits and they're thinking at the executive level, you have to come across that way. If they're workers on a floor and you hear swearing going on, maybe drop the odd swear word. If that's what gains you rapport with them, then sometimes it's acceptable. And most of all, be memorable. You've got to find something for them that really sticky in their brain. Something relates maybe to what they've gone through before, or something, a big event, something that happened. You're aiming to create a light bulb moment with your story. Remember, a story isn't just transferring facts. You've got to get that light bulb moment. But if you do, they will remember that story literally for years. I was told stories in my apprenticeship 33 years ago that I can tell you word for word because they were so impactful at the time. And so this is how you build a story. The first thing you do is you look at the negative or the ignorant dynamic. What's going on because they don't understand, they don't have the knowledge or the ability to act. Then go one step back and look at the types of behaviors you're observing that are leading to that negative dynamic. Okay, what are they doing? Are they not asking enough questions? Are they asking too many questions? Are they prioritizing one thing over another? Are they lacking in people skills or emotional quotient, EQ, to be able to handle complex decisions? Are they total waterfall thinkers and they think everything can be planned and is either simple or complicated, but they don't understand complexity? Work out what those behaviors are, scribble them down. The next thing we do is we look at the positive dynamic. What does this place look like after they've heard this story and they have the aha moment and they change their ways? And then work backwards from that and work out what the new behaviors are that would lead to that dynamic. So you're going from the old behaviors to the new behaviors. Now, if you just try and do that by pointing out what they're doing wrong and telling them what they've got to do right, who's experienced that not working before? I do. It does work sometimes. You get some people who, they're already good, they're on the path, they just needed to know how. And you told them how and boom, they're off. But for me, 80, 90% of people, this does not work for. So what we do is we use a story to go to the next level. So the first thing is you have to go one level deeper. And this is from a thing called the Dilts ladder. So we're working down 2 levels. And so if you want to see change at the behavior level, you have to go 2 levels down, which is the viewpoint or the mindset level. So think about the type of beliefs and mindsets that the people have that are leading to those behaviors. Can you see what we're doing there? So we're thinking, why would people act that way? And likewise, on the other side, we now think, what kind of mindsets, what kind of viewpoints or beliefs would they need to have so that their new behaviors just made sense? See, if you try and go from old behavior to new behavior, what you're doing, and I think I can use this language with you guys, you're knowledge managers, is you're transferring implicit knowledge in an attempt to change tacit behavior. Can you see the disconnect? I went jet skiing a couple of years ago, and I was told it's really easy. You'll have a great time. You know, jet skis on the water, on the lake. And I got on and I immediately fell off. I thought, that's weird. So I got on again and I had another go and I fell off straight away. And anyway, I got back to shore eventually and I talked to my mate who was also a motorbike rider like me. And he said, you're having the same trouble I did. A jet ski, to go left, you have to turn left. On a motorbike, if you want to go left, you turn right, which tips the bike, and then you go round left. To go left on the jet ski, you're turning right, you're learning left, and it's just throwing you straight off. It made sense to me. That's implicit knowledge. Do you think it helped me ride the jet ski? That turning left to go right was completely tacit, was muscle memory. No amount of people telling me turn left to go left, no amount of me repeating to myself turn left to go left, turn right to go right, overcame that tacit knowledge. I got better through the day, but I could not comfortably ride it. And if I stopped concentrating on it, I immediately fell off again the first time I tried to turn a corner. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take tacit to change tacit. So now think about what's the difference between these two mindsets, because that's what the story has to do. So we work out what this personal insight is for the person. Remember I said it has to be relatable, has to be in their language. This is why, because for them to have a personal insight, you've got to work out where their knowledge is and then camp your idea just outside it so they can stretch their tent to encompass it. It's really important. If you put it too far away, they just can't stretch. They can't get there. If it's already in their tent, you'll lose them halfway through the story. They already know it. So that placing of the new idea to the personal insight is really important. And the story you write then connects that. So let's have a look at that. Here's an example story. Volunteers are reporting information overload. They're all overloaded. Now, we want them to rely on embedded knowledge, not just more plans, more documents, more SOPs. We want them to actually build a network of expertise across the business. The type of behaviors we're seeing, bad behaviors, are an excess of updates and alerts and reading lists at briefings, the amount of reading you have to do all the time just to keep up, not to get ahead. We have pages as firefighters. I've got one here because I'm a volunteer firefighter. I continually get pages sent to me in the middle of my dinner with my family telling me who the new rostered duty officer is. Every single time the duty officer changes. And if I want to know who the duty officer is, I've got to open this up with this terrible interface and I've got to click through the menus, looking through to the last message where there was a duty officer change. How much better would it be just to publish who the duty officer is and make it immediately available on people's phones if they need to know it? So good behaviors would be thinking about when and where a person will need the knowledge and then making it discoverable and accessible instead of bombarding people with updates they don't care about and don't need to know right now. So the viewpoint and mindset behind this behavior on the left is more information is better, and people remember everything you tell them. On the right, you want the mindset of information overload is public enemy number one. Just-in-time knowledge is the best, and help the right person stumble across what they need to know when they need to know it. I call it just-in-time knowledge. And so what sort of story can we tell to move people from the old mindset to the new mindset? Well, at CFA, this is the story I tell. The first time I went to a volunteer brigade, the captain was standing up giving his briefing. He had a big list of things that he was reading out and he was working through them one at a time, and we were all standing around listening to them. He said, you all know there's a Bellevue tank up on Bellevue track, and it's fed from the tank on top of One Tree Hill. Well, the council called me during the week, and that pipe has had it. So during the week, they decommissioned it. Now, Bellevue tank is still working fine, and we can still use it for firefighting, but any water we take out of it, we need to replenish ourselves. Now, I thought, it's April, it's another 7 months until fire season. It's probably another 5 to 7 years before there'll be a fire on this hill. How is he going to get everyone in the room to remember that in 7 years' time? So that's the knowledge manager in me wondering how he's going to do this. So he looked around, he looked right, he looked left. And I know this tank up on the hill, you know, and how it's fed and everything. And so I thought, how's he going to embed this so we don't forget it? And he just looked out and read the next one. He didn't do anything. But here's the thing. Instead of just standing there telling everyone, what he's effectively doing is overburdening everyone with information. But if he had have just put a sign on the tank saying any water taken for this must be replenished, then he wouldn't have been wasting our time. Anybody that turned up at that tank would have known they had to refill it. But here's the special thing that happens when you embed knowledge artifacts in your environment. let's say we do have a big fire on the hill. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that hill is just out that window. So if that hill goes up, so does my house. When we have a fire on this hill, it's going to be big. It's a national park, and there will be people coming from all over the state. So let's say that there's a strike team in the forest from 8 hours away to the west. They don't even have forests out there, so they're not even big on forest fighting. And they turn up at this tank, and the strike team leader looks in the tank, has a look in the top. He sees 2 feet of water. So he doesn't just know that this is the end and he can't refill it, but he will do something really interesting. He will create knowledge on the fly. Because the sign says he needs to refill it, and because he can't refill it, he will now radio every other tanker on the fireground and tell them not to rely on that tank because it is now empty. There's no procedure to tell him to do that. There's no SOP. He was never trained to do that. We embedded the knowledge and it made sense. Now, when I tell that story at CFA, you see the light bulbs coming on because they're all living in overload. And the idea of having people, other people, place knowledge in my way so that I stumble across it when I need it is really attractive. And so this story has done the rounds for 3.5 years now and still gets great reactions and immediately helps them understand my job as knowledge manager. It's not about writing everything down. It's about getting the right knowledge to the right person at the right time. Okay, so this is the template that we're going to use. Moria's going to let you have a copy of this presentation. There is this one and the second story canvas page. You can print these out. You can grab a copy of them. You can fill them in. And this is how I build my stories. This is how I teach other people to build them. So we start with our negative and our positive dynamics. We work through the behaviors. We do the mindsets. And then we think about what's that insight that flips you over, that flips the listener over to the new mindset that you want them to have. Then we talk about actually what the story is. So right now we're going to do a bit of an activity. But before we do that, does anyone have any questions?
I think people are shocked because we usually look for prepared stories and ask what's the anecdote. We never dare to write our own stories or to find them.
There's a real skill to doing this. I've been doing it for over 20 years now, and it takes time. And the biggest skill for me at building these stories has not been this. This is really handy. It's an awesome tool. The biggest skill I've had is watching and listening to the people listening to my stories. You'll see if that light bulb moment comes on. And many of my stories, I fine tune telling after telling so that I'm getting the maximum benefit from that. So Moria is going to give you access to a...
There's access already to the slides. Please see them on the chat. And we will be now, and I'm opening the rooms now. 3, 2, 1, and they have 10 minutes. 8 minutes.
You've got 10 minutes. So what I want you to do is I want you to go through, read out these dynamics. I've already done all the dynamics for you. All I want you to do in the next 10 minutes is to work out what's the personal insight that you want to create, and then a basic story title. You don't need to read the whole story. If you can create a story for this in 10 minutes, go for it. But at least have a title of the story. Give us an idea of what sort of story you would use to help somebody move from the left side to the right side.
For this specific example? Or for
this is the example. So use this example. You can see here, this is a records example. So take a screenshot of this so that you've got it on your computer in your meeting. Because once you go into the breakout meetings, you won't have this up anymore.
Okay, so we'll open the rooms now. Just a minute. My computer.
See you in 10 minutes.
Yes, but my computer is stuck. I'll do it in a minute. Just here. Here we go. Open rooms, and we have it here with the example. All open. Wow.
Oh,
Stuart, you really did it. We showed us that it's not impossible. Even if we don't have the full story, we have the plot, we have the aha personal insight. I saw all rooms working, and it's great to go through them. People go through the aha moments. You'll enjoy every minute. Stuart, where are you? We are looking for your leadership.
I am back here. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Well done, everyone. I've just been having a quick look through, and you've done a great job. So let's just quickly have a look at a couple of them. So room one said that the insight was about the journey to get good requirements and behavioral change. And their story title was "What's Good for Me Will Be Good for You." And I like that. If you've got an organization that is really altruistic and very team focused and team based, that's an awesome story. Because you're taking them on a journey that they've already walked many times in other parts of their job, and now you're just calling records up to that same level. That's a really nice one. Room two, system helps, does not hinder. An elephant never forgets. Oh, I'd like to hear that story. That's a cool one. And I do like that the systems are there to help. Very good. Creates personas and design a knowledge product for using them and adding the business case. And so we started off in this place in our room. That's more of a tool thinking. So try and switch off your tool brain. This is actually just about helping them see a new way of working. And your story title there is Know Your Message. Very good. I really like this one. Recording information in the system as part of my day-to-day has helped me save time and avoids duplicate work. And that's the key thing. If you look at his mindset, he's busy, doesn't have time. So that's spot on. and then a story title called Keeping It Effortless. I love it. If you move to this way of working, you'll actually work less. That's awesome. You're spot on the money there. That's perfect. This is our room, and exactly the same. We looked at the time component and an example of somebody saving time. So telling the story of somebody else who's already taken the journey. And room 7, we can do it, just need support. Keep it simple, stupid. And that can be a way to do it. Just be careful with keep it simple, because I've run into a lot of IT people who aren't the best business analysts, and they start off giving you a tool to simplify, and it becomes more complicated than the old way. And what you'll see is the users will move across to a new way of working for a while, and then slowly they'll elastic band back to the old way of working because it was just easier for them. As soon as the senior management takes their eyes off it. So be careful of that one. Empower us to deliver better services. I love this. Keep a focus on the output. What's the value you're creating? That's really, really nice. And being a game changer. So linking that record keeping with success. That's really smart. I like that one. I don't know who was in that one, but that's excellent. I don't need to remember to keep my documents and file them easily. Just-in-time knowledge retrieval. Yeah, so a story. So once again, take them on the journey. So that's a good approach. The beauty of taking them on a journey of somebody else's journey is they're less likely to feel like you're telling them. Remember we talked about behavior, telling them the new behavior, and it doesn't really work. So if you're telling somebody else's story, it's kind of third party, and they don't fall into that feeling of being told what to do. Sharing is caring. This is really nice if you've got a level 4 or a level 5 records management system. If you've got one of the old records management systems like TRIM or something like that, they are literally known as places where information goes to die. And so the idea of putting more stuff in doesn't automatically equate with helping people. It's just being compliant. It's not actually helping us get our job done. And so if you take the sharing is caring approach, you better have the ability to back it up with good tech that really does help the organization retrieve those records and use them again. And that's not always the case. All right, well done. Let's look at the last one, room 15. Benefits to me, increased profit margin, compliance with legal requirement, save your skin. Yeah, if you're especially in the legal environment and you're not doing the record stuff, it can be you can lose your job, or your company can be sued or taken out by the government. So yeah, if you're in that environment, using a fear story may be appropriate, especially if you're dealing with an executive, because often they only respond to risks and threats. So that fear story could well be quite useful. Well done, guys. That's excellent. Any questions? Or you might have to tell me if anybody puts their hand up. I'm not sure if I can see.
No, but I see claps. I see people clapping.
Oh, good. Madan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, a quick question. How many templates like this do you have for different kinds of scenarios? Or this is something which takes a long time to evolve?
Yeah. So the canvas is the same. I'm about to show you the rest of the canvas. So the canvas stays the same, but what I've gotten better and better at over the years is going from the behavior, because you can see that. Just spend some time with the people. You'll see the behaviors. What's not so obvious, Madan, is the mindsets that's driving those behaviors. And so you take the time, you listen to them, you get them to tell you stories, and you work out why they're behaving the way they are. And if you get that right, the story will hit. You'll see the light bulbs come on. Okay, so I'll have a guess and I'll tell it to a couple of people and see if the light bulb comes on. If it doesn't, I go back to the storyboard and I start talking to people again and finding out what other motivations they have for behaving that way. And so there's a, you know, I've found people who are good at this are business analysts and psychologists. They're really good at working out the why. So if you've got someone in your team that's got a background in psychology, make use of them. Get them to help you with the research to find out what the mindsets are behind what they're doing. I can see Sergey in the room. Sergey's dad talks a lot about mindsets and how you get the mindset right, the behavior follows and it's effortless. You don't have to constantly motivate yourself because you've got the right mindset. I love it when he talks about that. So we're trying to do the same thing here. But instead of doing it to ourselves, we're telling a story to help somebody else take that step. All right. No worries. So when you actually then build your story, you do it with a sort of a 4-step. Now, this comes from Sean Callahan's book, Putting Stories to Work. If you're using stories, and even if you're not, I can't recommend this book highly enough. It's my favorite book on stories, and it is the most down to earth. It tells you step by step how to do it. So brilliant book, amazing guy. And Sean has a podcast about storytelling. So if you want to learn more about storytelling and hearing examples of stories that you might want to use, that podcast has hundreds of them. So check out the Anecdote podcast. It's well worth your time. And so the other thing to remember is a story is actually a mode of speaking. And I flip that mode by starting with a time or a place marker. Do you remember the story I told you before? I said, the first time I went to a volunteer fire brigade, the captain was standing up front. So I've told you when and where. And all of you immediately go, oh, he's telling a story. Now, I don't need to tell you I'm telling a story. In fact, include things that are happening, right, that are going on, use activities, including names and dialogue, but don't tell somebody you're telling them a story. Does that make sense? Just tell it. Just go straight into the story. And if you can, I find I'm more successful if I can be talking about something else and then without stopping, I roll straight into the story with a time and place marker. And they don't even realize that I've just switched their brains into story mode. It's really powerful. It's an unconscious trigger that they can't turn off. They've been taught it since childhood. And I don't know why, but I find Southern Asian people are really into it. Like Indian and Sri Lankan people, when you give a time place marker, it's like their brain transforms. It's amazing. I just connect with them so quickly when I do that little trick. So if you come from that area of the world or you're visiting that area of the world, make good use of that time place marker. It works really well. But the other thing is to use something unexpected. Now, remember I mentioned a story that I was told when I was an apprentice 33 years ago? That story included a building exploding and the people running out from the tea room thinking they'd been hit by a missile. That sticks in the brain. That's easy to remember. And so try and include something unexpected in your story, a little hook or a little turn that makes it set. This is the second page of the story canvas. So what you're doing here, you've gone through, you've worked out what your dynamics are, what your behaviors are and your mindsets. You've worked out your personal insight and now you're writing your story. And so with these things in mind, you state your point, you share an example, make your case, and then come back and restate your point. And if you're trying to get a story to change somebody, especially if you're presenting to a board or something like that, see if you can couch your story in this line and include these 4 points. Sometimes you can swap these around. You can make your case and then share an example. But in general, stating your point first, share an example, then making your case helps them do it. Just don't take too long to share the example. make sure it's a short story. If you take too long, you'll lose half of your people because they want you to make your point. And so you'll lose them halfway through. So there's the two parts of the story canvas. Okay, a few extra tips. It's a skill. You've really got to practice. So I'm constantly talking to firefighters. I'm constantly refining my stories. I'm constantly finding new stories to tell and finding ways that the stories can help move people forward in their knowledge practice. I never tell them I'm telling a story. I never use the S word. It's just part of my normal language. And everybody knows that if they're going to talk to me, they're probably going to be talking to me for 5 or 6 minutes because I'm going to tell them a story.
Stuart, there's a question out there.
Yeah.
Emmanuel is asking or stating that personal beliefs might be harder to be changed than mindset. What do you think about using the storytelling effectively to change the negative beliefs, not the negative behaviors?
Yeah, that's an awesome question right at this time in the world's history. And we saw a lot of pro-vax and anti-vax ideologists out there through the recent pandemic. And there's been a lot of research done. So if this is an area you're interested in, I really encourage you to do some reading in this area. But stories are a good way to help change. You must use third party though, because people are highly resistant to being told a new belief.
Yeah.
So I hope that helps. But there's lots of new research and some saying that in some cases you can't change their minds and you've just got to let them work it out for themselves. So I guess the key thing is there, don't spend too much time trying to convince somebody who's already made up their mind. My old boss used to say, there's 3 types of people. 10% of the people will always be negative. 10% will always be positive. And the 80% are in the middle and can be convinced either way. And so your story should always aim for the 80% and never try and get everyone. All right? It's pretty tough to do. And know the business point you're making. And this is, I'm going to finish this one. I think I'm nearly done, but this is really, really important. Your stories aren't there to make you look good or to make people laugh or to entertain people. Your stories should always have a business point. Now, you don't necessarily have to tell them what the business point is, but in your head, you should always know, why am I telling this story right now? And what is the outcome I'm expecting after telling it? Yeah. And that allows you also to evaluate, to ask a few questions afterwards and to see if your story made a difference. And so I really encourage you, have that business point. And that book by Sean Callahan, that talks a lot about that, about understanding why you're telling the story and telling a purposeful story. And if you build up that repertoire of stories that you have and that you can tell, you become more and more adept at just whipping out a story on the spot at the time when it's got to make the biggest difference. And in my experience, it's being able to pull the right story out at the right time that makes the most difference, not necessarily doing the crafting and then shoving it down everyone's throats. So craft several stories at once. Think about your projects, think about the moves, the change management you need to see in the organization, and have a bunch of stories ready to go for when you find yourself in those lucky situations to tell them. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for taking part and being brave. You did an awesome job with the activity. And if you've got any questions, I'm here every week. So if you want to, hit me up for a story, if you have a go and you crash and burn and you want to tell me your gory horror story of how badly it went, I'm all ears. I'd love to talk to you about it and see if I can help you. Moria, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I can only share that as to the recommendation, I bought this book and I'm reading it now. I'm in the middle, and I can tell you all that I get no profits from it. So whatever I'm saying is true and not because I have any benefit. He's also a storyteller, so he doesn't only have good points, he knows how to tell a story. So it's really easy to read.
Yeah, so sorry, I should have said that. Anecdote is a storytelling company. Sean Callahan was one of the early knowledge managers in Australia. He recognized the power of story and moved across and built a whole business all around helping organizations find and tell stories, and has done very well over the years. I think he's got 6 or 7 employees now just doing story work with big government, private, oil and gas, everything. It's amazing what he's done. Really incredible work.
Great. So I think that will end this session. As you said, there are also additional books that can be recommended, like Dan and Heath's book, not the Switch book. That's about change management. It's of course connected, but the Stick book, how to do business storytelling and make ideas stick. So read whatever book you have. Send us your recommendations. And as I see from Stuart, it's not only to succeed in telling a story, but it's also to enjoy doing it. So let us all enjoy and have a great day, a great night, a great morning, and good night. It's midnight now to you, Stuart. Please go to sleep. Before you go, Maura, you've just reminded me, I'm just going to put for everybody in the chat, I'm going to put a link to Sean Callahan's Story Finder. He has a database of hundreds of stories. If you use that link, you can go through and find a story on a topic that you're looking for a story for and have one in minutes. So make use of that database. He's put so much work into it, and I've used it multiple times. It's very good. I hope it really blesses you. We'll see you next week, guys. Thank you all, and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you very
much.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Bye, everyone.